Hey everyone, welcome to A Mess Nonetheless. I'm Rachel.
And Melissa. And we are sisters. And we have a dad with us.
And I'm Dad.
You can't see us if you're on our podcast, but if you're on YouTube, you can see we have a dad with us.
A man in the picture.
A man. Our first man on our podcast. So we decided to have our dad on for a number of reasons. One, he's visiting me in Arizona, and I was already going to podcast, so it was perfect timing. But two, our mom said to us recently, I'm surprised you've never had dad on. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about it. If you've been listening to our podcast for a while, you know, we talk about our dad all the time. And all the wisdom, you listen to our podcast, all the wisdoms and insights that he has imparted in our life. And so he's the
Kurt-isms, as he would call them.
Yes, Kurt-isms. And so we feel really thankful that he's willing to be on with us. And I, for one, am very excited about what he's going to talk about. Melissa,
I have no idea what we're talking about.
Melissa would be excited if she knew.
She would be.
So our dad is...
What are we talking about?
Our dad is going to talk to us today about the importance of reading the Gospels. Because as you've probably heard us say before a number of times, that our dad always says, read the Gospels and then read them again, and then read them again, and then read them again. So that's what we're going to talk about. So Dad is going to start by sharing kind of his story.
A little bit.
Yeah.
How I got to that point. So, and you guys, you gals, my daughters, you know bits and pieces of this story, but as Rachel and I were talking, it's like, I don't think you've probably heard it all.
That's what I was just thinking when Rachel said, tell your story. I was like, oh, I'm excited about this.
Me too, because it's different every time.
It should be the same story now.
So going way back, I was baptized when I was 3, and I remember that.
What?
And there was something about, okay, don't keep saying that because it'll sound like we never talked. That can't be good. Go, oh yeah, I remember you saying that. But I was 3. I think it was around 3, but I remember it. My sister was baptized too. I don't remember that part, but I knew it had something to do with me and God. And so throughout, we went to church because that's what you did. We never talked about faith stuff at home because we didn't. We talked about the pastor, but we didn't talk about faith stuff.
You talked bad about the pastor?
Gossiping.
Some of each. As a friend of mine said, we'd come home and have pastor for lunch.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, oh, you had them over? No, we just had them. So I grew up, with this sense that there's something about me and God, and I didn't know what it was. When I was a senior, I was dating a girl named Barb. I only go out with Barbs and marry them. And I was going to Air Force Base at Grand Forks to take some tests for an Air Force ROTC scholarship. And there was going to be a lot of wait time because it's called the Air Force and there's a lot of wait time. And so my girlfriend gave me a book to read called The Robe, which was written in the 40s, I think. And it was a really bad movie made about it in the 50s, and which I only watched just recently. But anyway, longer story, as short as I can make it, I flunked out. My vocabulary was too bad, and I wanted to be a pilot. And they said, we can't have you looking for the right word in an emergency situation. So I flunked out of that.
Interesting. I knew about you going to this training and whatever. I didn't realize that was why you didn't make it. That's interesting.
And it should be noted that our dad is very smart, brilliant man. He was a valedictorian of his high school. So how did you flunk? I'm surprised.
My vocabulary. It was my vocabulary.
Yeah. Amazing.
Everything else. I mean, there was stuff where we looked at shots from 40,000 feet and then bombing runs, and I had to figure out where on the map we were. Nailed it.
Of course.
So that kind of stuff I did well.
Interesting.
So because I flunk out, I had a lot of waiting time, and I had this thick book to read. And I read and read and read, and then there was a blizzard, so that extended the time. And I read the entire robe during that time, and I saw a different Jesus than I saw in Sunday school. The Jesus I saw in Sunday school was the kind of mild and meek, blue-eyed guy that had sheep on his shoulders. That had lamb on his shoulders. And the songs we sang, I just thought about this morning. One of the songs we sang was be careful, little children, what you do. Be careful, little children, what you see, for the Father up above is looking down in love. And I'm going, so my concept of God was a holy smiter and in the sky watching over me, and but not in a good way. And I saw a Jesus I never saw again. You know, what's fascinating is I read this book again just a few years during COVID, when we were stuck down here in COVID. I was listening to it, and there was very little about Jesus. It was mostly about the centurion that gambled and got the robe at the cross.
So are you saying that the book actually doesn't have a lot to do with Jesus, but you saw a different Jesus through the book?
There was the Jesus and the centurion. We're on a collision course, but there was very little about Jesus. But I saw a different Jesus. I saw a real Jesus. I came home. I was alone in that. I came home, started reading the King James Gospels, and that didn't last long because I was alone and had nobody to talk about it because we didn't talk about stuff, and didn't have a youth person. I wasn't in youth ministry or anything, so it was pretty alone. Went to college, and there was still this sense of God in me in some manner, shape, or form. Didn't know what it meant. Even went to church. Nobody went to church in college, but I even went to church as often as I could. And then fast forward a little bit, and you guys know some of this story, but I got involved with Young Life. And for your listeners, it's a non-denominational ministry to at that time, just high school kids, where the focus was we would go into the kids' world and befriend them. Incarnational witness is really the theological term, but Jesus and me going to kids. And so I got involved in that. And in my training, one of the first passages that I remember landing on was Colossians 1:15, which in the Phillips translation says, "Now Jesus is the visible expression of the invisible God." And I remember thinking, I don't know what God's like. And I started reading the Gospels. So this is 50-ish years ago, a little over. And I started reading the Gospels only. Little side note, the church I was going to said you don't need to read the Gospels because the meat of the word is in the epistles. The Gospels are for unbelievers and new believers.
Hey, Dad, will you pause for a second? Can you just clarify for people listening in case they don't know what the Gospels are and what it means? And then also clarify what the epistles are, just for people who maybe don't know that.
Let's see, Gospels. I got to look that up. Oh, no. It's the first four books in the New It's the first four books in the New Testament, which are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew was written probably by Matthew, one of Jesus's friends, disciples. Mark was probably written for Peter. Peter was probably the one that gave him the information. Mark was not a disciple. Luke was a doctor who said, there's all these writings out there and I want to pull them all together. And so he did, and he was really writing to Greeks. Matthew was writing to probably to Jewish people. And then John, who maybe 30, 40 years after Jesus's death and resurrection, told his story. And he was one of the friends of the disciples, but he told it different. So anyway, that's the four Gospels.
And the Gospels means good news.
Good news. And and actually the writers are called evangelists because the word evangelism is the same as good news. So they're telling the good news. Evangelion. The epistles are letters written to the early church, most of them written by the Apostle Paul. But other people too, written to pockets of churches and stuff. And there were a whole lot of other writings out there at the time, but that's what's in our scripture today. So I was told that if you really want to grow and be mature, and everybody does, you want to spend all your time reading Romans and the Corinthians and the different letters. And actually was told that the Gospels were pretty for newer Christians and in a sense almost weaker.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting.
Terrible. It's terrible.
Information.
And I'm not the only one that ever heard that. I'm amazed at how many people heard that from the 70s era. So where were we?
So you started reading the Gospels at the
I started reading the Gospels on my own again, but it was so that I could I could communicate the Jesus story better to high school kids in young life. So that was the but I found myself reading it. If I remember right, I read all 4 Gospels 7 times in a year. I read nothing else unless I needed to, but that's all I did in 7 different translations, which was significant. And at that time, 7 different translations meant I had to go out and spend money on 7 different Bibles because you couldn't look it up online. So that was transformative. I would say that was one of the most transformative things that I ever did. But then I never quit. I just kept reading the Gospels. And it was like, I couldn't not be doing that. So fast forward maybe 25 years, 30 years, I discover that what it meant to be a disciple in Jesus's era. So a fascinating thing is when Jesus invited people to follow him, because it was a religious culture, they knew exactly what he was asking of them. Rabbis were always inviting people to follow them, except the difference was rabbis would take resumes from students and then pick ones that they wanted.
Interesting.
And the way they would really issue their acceptance letter was to say, "Follow me." Which, to pause a second, think of the fact that Jesus turned that around and invited people to follow him who had no resume at all. So I think that's fascinating. So here's what the disciple or apprentice is really a good word, student, learner. This is what they heard when they were, or understood when the rabbi said, "Follow me." And by the way, Jesus to those people in the culture was a rabbi. He was, they didn't know what he was yet. They were trying to figure that out.
Well, that's why they called him teacher.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And rabbi often.
Yeah.
And so when a rabbi said, "Follow me," there were 4 things that that they knew were a part of that. Be with me, learn from me, become like me, and join me in my mission. And I think, and this is a broad, I do a lot of broad strokes, but I think broadly in our Western Christian culture, we've jumped right to transformation, become like me, and to join him in his mission or do ministry. And skip the first one, which leads to the second one.
The first 2 were be with me and become like me?
No. Be with me and learn from me.
Learn from me. Okay.
And so we can maybe come back to that. So when Jesus called the disciples, they left and went with him. They obviously learned from him. They obviously became like him. There's a place in Acts where it said, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. So there was a sense that you kind of look like Jesus. I don't know if that's what they were actually saying in that context, but I hear that a little bit in the whole thing.
I think of it like when Rachel and I are together for a longer period of time, we kind of take on each other's mannerisms, and just by being together, and people who know her and see me or vice versa, they're like, "Oh my gosh, you look just like your sister when you did that." And so,
yeah.
Which is why you both have curly hair now.
Yeah.
What was fun for me to realize is I had been doing number 1 and number 2. I was being with him all the time. Well, I was obviously learning from him, and then transformation happens, and I can't make that happen. when Paul said, don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that word transform is metamorpho, which is metamorphosis, which is, the caterpillar.
These weird words we're saying are the Greek words. However you say that one.
A caterpillar does its job, eats, stays alive, spins a cocoon or a chrysalis or something, and the rest is God's deal. Mm-hmm. God transforms that caterpillar. So being with him, reading the Gospels, learning from him, that's like eating. And I can't make the transformation happen. Mm-hmm. So going back to what we do culturally, I think, is we try to transform ourselves. Mm-hmm. And most of us know that doesn't work. No, it doesn't work at all. And so that we can do ministry. Mm-hmm. And Jesus's thing, the rabbi's thing was, that's coming later. Mm-hmm. That's a later thing. For now, just be with me and learn from me. Mm-hmm. And then they become like him. And they did join him in his mission. And rabbis had a mission. They had it'd be like a professor that invited someone to TA with him and then do research with me. Yeah. Same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So now, so that's over 50 years, and that hasn't changed for me. I read all kinds of other stuff, but the Gospels have to be in the mix of it. I knew of a pastor in Jackson, Mississippi that said he started every sermon prep by reading all 4 Gospels.
Whoa. Every week?
Every week.
Wow.
Every week. I presently am listening to, and have been for about a year and a half, listening to Annie F. Downs read the Gospels.
Yep, that's
Let's read the Gospels.
That's the podcast, Let's Read the Gospels. So she reads them, and then I realized you only have to read 3 chapters a day to read all 4 Gospels in a month. Mm-hmm. And that's what she does. Yep. And so, as I've continued to grow in my career, which is leadership development, I help other people do ministry better than I ever did. And I always make them read the Gospels. So the Young Life region that I'm a part of, I've been a part of pretty much every staff person's life in a training process. And the whole time we're together, a year, they're immersed in the Gospels. And I explain, immersed means that you intend to read them several times in a year. If you don't have that kind of thing, you're not immersed. I was doing this with one guy one time. Go ahead. You had a question?
Well, I was going to say, so if it takes 3 chapters a day to read all 4 in a month, and you want to read all 4 a few times a year, you're talking like half a chapter a day.
Yeah.
Right?
Or chapter a day is.
But I'm saying for people who might think, oh, that's a lot. It's like, if you break it down, it's really what it breaks down to.
Yep. It's really pretty simple. It's got more to do with the intentionality is, right. I need to be with Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's why I do that with people in my training circle is, and they've all said the same thing. We've read parts of the Gospels because that's what we do for our job. Mm-hmm. But we haven't sat down and just read it. My own pastor, he became my pastor. He was actually, he and I both started a ministry at the same time. He started a church, and I launched Young Life in our community. And we were both sent by the same church to go do this, which is pretty fascinating when you think about it. And a few years in, about 3 years in, it gets pretty hard. Anytime you start something, that's about the time where people usually check out. And that's about the time when things just start to happen. Yeah. And he was at that 3-year mark. I don't know that he wanted to check out, but it was difficult for him. And so he came to me, and it was suggested that he come to me and let me mentor him, air quotes. Mm-hmm. And we got together, and he said, what does this look like? And I said, here's what it's going to look like. he gets his notebook out to take notes. And I said, read the Gospels. He writes down, read the Gospels. He said, then what? Well,
Read
let's
it
get
again.
together. Let's get together in a few weeks and find out what's happened. And so we got together in a few weeks, and he said, oh my gosh, I have an MDiv, and this has been transformative already.
An MDiv is a 4-year master's program in ministry.
And
4 years after college.
Yeah,
So
master's in divinity.
it's like if you went to college and then med school, that's how much an MDiv is equivalent to school-wise.
So he said the same thing, and pretty much everybody says the same thing.
Wait, what did he say? I have an MDiv in what?
And this has been transformative.
Okay, I was like, I think I missed that.
And I think he might have even alluded to, and he's told the story from the pulpit, so I can get away with this. And I'm not using names anyway, but you can look them up. No. And yeah, he said, same as everybody. I'm in the Gospels because I need to be, not to be with him, but because I need to be. It's my source of alert. It's sermon prep, all that stuff.
Well, and let's just pause and think of it. I always love to compare real or like earth physical relationships to help draw the parallel. Is that if I have somebody in my life who spends time with me because they have to, and then suddenly they start spending time with me because they want
And
to.
they need something from you?
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right.
And then it changes where they start spending time with me simply because they desire to know me more and to be with me. That's going to change our entire relationship. And so the same thing's going to happen with Jesus.
Yep. So, and I get the same thing from just about everybody except the ones who really don't want to do it. And there's people who don't. There was one guy, this was fascinating. I said, immerse yourself in the Gospels. And every time we're together, that's the first question I'm going to ask. And in this particular, we were on a 2-week rhythm for a training thing. And I said, so where have you been in the Gospels and what are you hearing? And John 4 or something. And then 2 weeks later, I said, so now where have you been and what are you hearing? John 4. And I said, do you understand immersion? And he said, well, no, I want to go through it slowly. And I said, no, I want you to read a lot. I want you to get the big story. I don't want you to dive deep into what the woman at the well maybe really was out there for or something like that, wherever he was parked. I said, parking, there's a place for that. But I said, I want you to hear the Jesus story. And part of the reason for that, and now I'm going to move into how this fits ministry is, and we're all called to ministry, by the way. We're called to serve others. That's what the word ministry means. And to do that incarnationally, Jesus in me. So, where was I going with this?
Well, you said we're all called to do ministry. I mean, that was what Jesus said to us before he left this earth. Go and make, that's the Great Commission in Matthew 28.
And if for anyone listening who's like, I don't have a place to go do ministry, or I don't have time to go do ministry, he's not talking about necessarily signing up for something. He's saying in our everyday life, we are serving and being good news to people on behalf of Jesus.
Yeah. Jesus never talked about programming ever. He said, go and make disciples of the nations.
Yeah. And I think the Greek in that go is as you go, make disciples. So
I like that, as you go through life.
And it's make disciples. Be with me, learn from me, become like me. And so we actually get to disciple people and they do learn from us and they do become a bit like us. And then we want to point them toward Jesus the whole time. Yeah. And then they become like him. Eugene Peterson. Do you guys talk about Eugene Peterson in your podcast? I'm trying to remember if you have.
I don't think we have. I have in sermons, but yeah. Tell
Eugene Peterson is, he passed away a few years ago. He is one of my favorite people to read his stuff. He's the guy that wrote the Message paraphrase.
Oh, and, I didn't realize that.
Yep.
Oh, you didn't?
And his thing was when he was asked, why are you writing a paraphrase? He said, I paraphrase every Sunday morning for my congregation. Right. So I'm just going to start writing it down.
So you guys, if you don't know what the message is, it is the Bible paraphrased, literally.
Yep.
So it's like you're reading the Bible, but it's been paraphrased to make it, it's a really great book to read if you struggle to understand the Bible, if you understand, because it draws you in. It's just very well written. It's very, very cool.
Yeah, very story-ish.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Peterson, one of the books he wrote is called, Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And it's basically, how do we do life the way Jesus would do our life if he was us? And he talks about ministry, about doing the Jesus way. And that's a big part of my thinking culture, is the Jesus way.
Mm-hmm.
So when I train people in Young Life Ministry or church youth ministry or other places, we talk about the Jesus way. There's the Jesus way, and then there's those other ones that can look awful successful, but they're not the Jesus way because they're trying to shortcut some things.
Mm-hmm.
You can't shortcut. Be with me, learn from me, become like me. You can't. And that's the significance of doing this. This is just an ongoing thing. It's not like a lifelong commitment. It's just being with Jesus. It's just that natural.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward to just this past few months, I was talking with a friend of mine about, he's in a newer church. I'm in a somewhat newer church, and we were talking about what a discipleship program, air quotes, might look like in our churches, because an intentional one. And we both said, well, you wouldn't call it a program. And, that was the first thing, is you would not call it a program. And I knew as soon as we had that conversation, I don't know where she went, but
Rachel just left the screen.
or chuckling that you left. I knew exactly what I would do if I did that. And I came home and I thought about it, and I thought, I got to do this. And so just a few weeks ago, a month ago or so, I started having a conversation with a handful of guys and told them, this is what discipleship means. And if they haven't got this yet, be with me, but that whole thing. And I was asking them to join me in a year-long process of gospel immersion. Just the first thing, be with me, and let the rest just happen.
Yeah.
Metamorphosis. And we've started this process. We started it a couple weeks ago. We're committed to reading through the Gospels many times in a year. We're going to come together about every 6 weeks and talk about what we're reading, what we're hearing, what we're discovering, what we don't know. Jesus is a visible expression of the invisible God. Mm-hmm. And new things, things we wonder about, things that make our head scratched or our head hurt, or I knew a woman that said, I got springs coming out of my head now that just make things blow up. And every one of the guys, when I was in the inviting process, I didn't even finish the pitch of what I wanted it to be. They said, I'm in. And I said, but in 1 year, you will take a handful of people and do the same thing. Oh, I'm in. Mm-hmm. And so I can't tell you where that's gone so far, or going to go, because we don't meet for a few weeks yet. But initially, there's just a sense of, oh my gosh, I have to do this. Mm-hmm. So
that's amazing. I love that.
You guys got to start asking some questions now.
I know. Well, it's just been so great to hear it all. I think I'm like, I know a lot of this because you and I have been talking about all this, and I'm still like, this is so good. And I want to send this podcast to our entire church staff, because I'm like, we all need to be hearing this. We all need to be hearing this. So I have a friend who recently was challenged by another friend of ours. Hey, like, you're not reading the Bible. Like, why aren't you reading the Bible? And this friend was like, yeah, I just really struggle. I don't really know what to do and how to do it. And the other friend said, you need someone to hold you accountable. I think you should ask Rachel to hold you accountable. So she comes to me and says, would you hold me accountable? I said, of course. This was like maybe April or May last year. So 6 months ago. And I check in with her every couple of weeks. She said, where should I start? And I said, start in the Gospels. And I said, read it, but also I think you should listen to Let's Read the Gospels. And so with Annie F. Downs. And so she started doing that. And she's like, I have to read at the same time. She's like, I don't pay enough attention. And I said, great. That's even, I think that's phenomenal. So we're talking recently and she's telling me and this other friend, she's saying what has changed in her life. And she's like, everything. My marriage is changing. My kids are changing. My parenting is changing. She's like, my outlook on everything. She's like, there is no way you could have explained to me that just reading the Gospels was going to change everything in my life. And she's like, but I can't believe it. It is literally changing everything. And I've seen some of the change in their family and in their desire for their kids to, and it's like, if you're not in the Bible, are your kids going to be in the Bible? I mean, I remember when Brighton was born, just knowing I had always been very inconsistent in the Bible. I read it, but it was more of a duty and I should read that and whatever. And I just remember being like, I just want my children to grow up seeing me in the Word. And so he was like months old. What could he possibly, learn from or even remember of that time? But I was like, it just has to become a part of my life. And so I forever I still sit on my couch and read my Bible. That's where I do it. And some people are like, well, I like to go in my room and close the door. That's fine. I'm not going to say that's wrong. But for me, I wanted my kids to see me in the Bible. I want them to hear me. I play Let's Read the Gospels on Alexa. I want them to hear it too. I will use my Bible, the YouVersion app. You can switch narrations and you can switch, versions. And each version has a number of narrators. So you can find one that really works. There's this one under the New Living Translation called like the Streetlights Gospels. And it's like, it's totally like just this black guy on the streets, like and this is what Jesus did. And he did this. And it's so engaging. And my kids are like,
what is the app?
So the app is the YouVersion Bible app.
Okay.
It's where you can read the Bible. You can make notes.
Or Y-O-U?
Y-O-U.
Okay.
The app is just a brown Bible. No, it's maroon. It's just Holy Bible is what the app looks like. But in it, you can do devotional plans. You can invite your friends to do devotional plans where you guys can comment on things. There's like 2-day devotionals. There's 40-day devotionals. There's 365-day devotionals. There's just tons of them. And then every version of the Bible, I don't know if every version of the Bible's in there, but there's, how many versions of the Bible are there, Dad? Do you even know?
No.
This app has to have 50 versions and you can compare. So you can take a verse and be like, I want to compare it. And it'll pull up all these other versions. So you can literally read it right there on the spot in all these other versions. You can make notes. You can read other people's notes if they've been made public. And I learn a ton when I'm sermon prepping. I read other people's notes. I want to know what other people are saying, not because they're right all the time, but because they will usually open a thought process for me that I haven't had. I think there's commentaries on the app too, right? Am I making?
I don't know. I don't use that.
I don't use it for commentaries. I always use commentaries elsewhere. So maybe that's not correct. But, and then if you're in the Bible, like let's say you just pull up, Matthew 17, there's a little speaker on the top and then it'll give you your options. Oh, switch narrators. I want this. I want a man. I want a woman. I want whatever. And then you play it and then you can read along and it'll kind of bounce. The lines will kind of bounce through the passages as the voice is. So it's like really easy to follow along. And so they were telling me about that. And now I'm like listening to the Streetlights one because it's more engaging to my kids. And what were we going to say, Dad?
Well, so one of the things that people often say is, I don't understand it. And the reality is, I don't understand a lot of it either. And which is fair. Do we have time for a little story?
Yeah, you're going to tell the Kingdom of Heaven story?
No, what's that one?
30 years?
No.
Oh.
No.
We don't have time for that.
Well, that's a whole nother podcast.
Okay. I just have to say, he said there was something 30 years ago. He goes, she took the mic from me. There's something 30 years ago he started pondering and ruminating on. And just 2 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, however many, just a few weeks ago, he finally felt like he understood it. Something for 30 years. And he never, yeah. So that's a quick story, but I'm like, that's just like, you're like, I don't know when I'm going to know the answer or understand this. But for you to say, yeah, you don't understand it. And we would deem you as like a very much a scholar. In fact, I was supposed to, per me, I would. But I'm sorry, you have like a PhD in like Christian stuff. I'm sorry. It's not a PhD. It's a doctorate of education and higher, but it's very Christian. I can't remember.
Christian stuff. That makes you smart.
I've asked him so many times.
Is that on your card?
Living, I don't know, Christians.
Masters in ministry.
I want to know if that's on your card, Dad. Kurt Hinkle does Christian stuff.
I mean, you're a doctor. You have a master, right? You were definitely, and you have a blog. Our dad has a blog called Don't tell me.
I'll tell you.
Practical Theologian. No.
Practical Theology. Now you mess me. Practicaltheology.com.
And
which is what we're talking about, is how do we make all this practical?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And everything is amazing on there. Like, I definitely recommend you check it out. So you were going to tell the story.
Tell my story?
Yes. Okay.
I hope it's good. So I was in a church that had a confirmation program of freshmen and sophomores. So they're in a place where they can cognitively try to understand stuff. And I wanted them to understand the value of the Gospels. And so I've kept a journal for years, or journals, I guess would be plural. Mm-hmm. And so I brought a box of them in from my past, not recent ones, because didn't want to chance names in there that they would recognize or anything like that. And I dumped them out in the middle of 50 kids, and I said, grab one and share, like two of you read the same one. Pick a date, just pick one date, read about it, and let them, they kind of ask me questions. One of my favorite questions, and I think I've told you this, was, so my wife's name is Barb, and they go, who's Barb and why is she crabby again? Mom knows this one, so we're good.
That's funny.
But they had a hard time reading my writing, and yet they could figure out in general what was going on. There's a learning thing. Okay, I don't totally understand every word, but I've got the general idea what happened that day. They understood that piece. But the thing I left them with was, and that's part of that, I don't understand it all. It's like, you don't have to. You get the big idea. Mm-hmm. And then I asked them, I said, what do you know about me that you didn't know 10 minutes ago? And they start throwing out stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's like, there you go. That's why we read the Gospels. And so I showed a picture of all my grandkids at the time, which is half as many as we have now. And I said, these are my grandkids. And of course the girls are all, and the guys are going, yeah, who cares? And I said, if I got hit crossing the highway on my way home and didn't survive the crash, these little kids would grow up without their grandpa. And invariably some kid in the room says it, but they could read your journals and get to know you. There it is. Oh, I got chills.
Yeah.
That was good.
That was good.
What I just said was
my own story.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm done.
But in Dad's defense, he didn't actually say the thing. It was like the kid. Yeah. I mean, you got him to say that, but that's amazing. That story needs to be told. I need to tell that story sometime. I mean, we're telling it right. We're telling right now on the podcast.
So I was in confirmation.
I really need this story out there. Oh wait, we're putting it out there right now.
Yeah, that's true.
Excuse me.
I mean, I might need to use that in a sermon someday.
There you go.
Yeah. Because I'm like, that's really good.
My dad with a PhD in Christian stuff.
You
didn't know that I view you as a scholar?
No, you want to hear something interesting? Well, sidebar. So at Bethel University's Doctor of Education program for K-12, somehow I got involved. Well, I knew the director, and a book I recommended he read, he made required reading. And so he said, but I want you to come and facilitate discussion around it. I was like, oh, that should be fun. I show up at the first one, and a guy named Greg Boyd, and you can Google him, and he's written a lot of good stuff. One that he wrote 20 years ago that's getting traction again is The Myth of a Christian Nation or something like that. But he's written a lot of good stuff, and he was on before me.
What? I didn't know. Oh, I forgot you told me that.
And the director said, now we have another public intellectual. And I'm looking around going,
who is it?
I thought it was me. I thought I was supposed to be on. Am I early? So I'm a public intellectual, apparently.
I love that. Melissa, do you have any, I mean, we're 40 minutes in, so we certainly could wrap this up. Do you have any questions, any thoughts?
No, I think my favorite part of all this is how I think that it's a common struggle for people to know how to read the Bible, to know where to start, and it's just, you just made it so simple by saying, just read the Gospels. I mean, I'm not saying you're not going to read other things, but if you want to know if our desire is to become like Jesus, we can only become like him if we get to know him, and
only one way. There's only one way.
Right. And we can only get to know him if we read about him, because that's what he left us, is his story to read. And so I just think I just feel like there's probably a lot of people listening who's like, oh,
yep,
I agree. That.
I agree. Well, most people have a commute to work, or even if they work from home, they have a period of time where they're getting ready in their bathroom and they're taking a shower. Like, I listen to Let's Read the Gospel when I'm in the shower.
Yeah.
I mean, I listen to it other times too, but I'm like, well, I have 5-10 minutes. Like this last year, it was like a 7-minute episode a day. Last year, it was like 15 to 20. So it's shorter this last season that she did. But yeah, I'm like, and I just listen. I mean, I listen to it when I'm cleaning the kitchen and when I'm in the car. And there's so many times of the day where we have opportunities to listen to something. And even if you're like, well, I struggle to listen, well, listen to it and then go home and read it later. Like, you know what I mean? And now you're getting it in 2 different ways.
Yeah.
So
I start every morning. That's the first thing I put on is her podcast, because it's just free. And I just started from the very beginning, from a couple years ago when she started it. Yeah. And just every day I listen to it. And
And how often do you go, huh? I never heard that before.
Yeah. Even though, because I've read the Gospels many times, so this is not a new thing for me. And it is. And what I love about Annie F. Downs' podcast is she ends it with a couple things that stand out to her. And sometimes what she says, I was like, oh, I didn't get that, or I didn't hear that, or that didn't stand out to me, but now now it does. And so it's very cool.
For sure. All right. Well, so I guess our challenge is implement.
Start reading the Gospels.
Reading the Gospel, implement it in some way, somehow. Would that be your challenge to people?
Yeah. Just do it. It's a Nike thing.
Just do it. So, Dad, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I loved it. It was fun getting to be a part of this, and being the first guy, and being a scholar and a gentleman and all that, and whatever.
Public intellectual.
Yes, of Christian stuff.
Well, and you're a gentleman. I didn't say that.
No,
officer and a gentleman, a gentleman and a scholar. That's an old saying. A gentleman and a scholar is an old saying.
That's funny.
Really
what
old.
Were we going to say, Miss?
He's ancient.
He is.
Well, I want you guys to know that he faithfully is a podcast listener. Our dad is.
Yes.
He listens every single week, and he often will text us things that make him laugh, or things that he really likes, whatever. And so he's not even just on here like as a thing, like to
contribute or
truly loves our podcast. And I just think that is so sweet.
Me too. I would never, honestly, we never expected you to listen to even, even one. Literally, we were like, did you? I think we found out like 10 episodes in. We're like, did you know Dad listens to our podcast? Someone said something like, he listens to it. I was like, and of course, we were like, of course, at that time you had never told us. And we were like, that's so Dad.
Exactly.
But then you started saying like, oh, I like this. Or
Yeah. And what's funny is, because you pre-record them, is I'll send a note and say, oh, I love this part. And you'll go, what part?
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Melissa, you couldn't say it to her. Me, because I edit them and I promote them, I'm more in the aware of which ones are coming out.
Yes.
Well, we'll be like, have we ever done a podcast on this? And Melissa's like, you're asking me? Have we done one? Oh my gosh. All right. We're going to wrap this up. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. I have no doubt that every single person walked away with something, if not multiple things that they can learn from today. So thanks, Dad. So, after finishing this episode, something our dad said to us is that us girls have heard bits and pieces of his story our whole life. But then he sat down and shared it in a way we had never heard. And it really brought everything all together. And he was like, that's reading the Gospels.
Yeah.
That's instead of understanding bits and pieces of the story of Jesus, it's the whole story.
Yeah. And it changes things when you hear how things connect and how things, I didn't know this is why you didn't do this because of this. And then that led to this. And I didn't, it just connects all the pieces.
Well, it's literally like doing a puzzle where you're like, what is this going to be in this corner? And this looks like it's going to be nothing. And obviously if you have the box, you know what the goal is, but then you see it together and you're like, all those pieces, they all worked together.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyways, we just wanted to throw that in there because that was something we realized after we stopped recording.
Yeah.
You might feel that your life is a mess, but don't feel bad. Ours is too, but we own a microphone and we have no shame. That's why we'll talk about how our life is a mess nonetheless. That's the name of our podcast.